Poor 8-year-old girl sang while cleaning the millionaire's Mustang. When he heard her, he started crying. Just before we start, this community spans every continent. Drop your city's name if you feel comfortable sharing. The alarm clock's harsh buzzing cuts through the pre-dawn silence of Sophie Miller's tiny apartment in Bridgeport. At 8 years old, most children are dreaming of cartoons and playground adventures, but Sophie's small hands are already reaching for the worn notebook on her nightstand, where she keeps track of everything: grocery lists, medicine schedules, and the growing pile of hospital bills. 2 weeks. That's how long Grandma Martha has been in the hospital, fighting pneumonia that just won't let go. The doctors say she's stable, but stable doesn't pay for the medications that insurance won't cover. Stable doesn't explain why a 67-year-old woman who spent her entire life caring for others as a nurse now lies connected to machines, looking so small and fragile. Sophie brushes her teeth with practiced efficiency, braids her light brown hair, the way Martha taught her, and checks the weather through their cramped kitchen window. Rain clouds are gathering, which means more cars will need their windshields cleaned today. More opportunities to earn the money they desperately need. 15 miles away, in the pristine silence of Westlake Hills, James Reynolds awakens in a king-size bed that feels like an ocean of loneliness. At 42, he's built an empire in real estate development, turning empty lots into shopping centers and apartment complexes that generate millions. His mansion overlooks the city like a monument to success, but success tastes bitter when there's no one to share it with. The morning routine is always the same. Coffee from an expensive machine that makes perfect espresso for one. Financial reports spread across a mahogany table that could seat 12 but never does. The numbers are impressive, another quarter of record profits, but James barely glances at them. Through the window, he watches Peter, his longtime driver, lovingly polishing the cherry-red 1968 Mustang in the driveway. It's one of the few possessions James truly cherishes, a reminder of simpler times when he and Elizabeth would drive through the countryside, planning their future together. Before the accident took everything away. 7 years. 7 years since the crash that killed his wife and daughter, leaving him with nothing but money he doesn't want and a heart that forgot how to beat properly. He's tried therapy, tried traveling, tried burying himself in work. Nothing fills the void where his family used to be. As Sophie counts the few dollars in her piggy bank, calculating how many cars she'll need to clean to afford Martha's next prescription, James stares at a framed photo on his desk. Elizabeth's radiant smile, her arms wrapped around baby Emily. The photo was taken just weeks before they died, back when James believed in happy endings. Neither Sophie nor James knows that in a few hours their separate worlds will collide at a red light on 4th Street. Neither knows that a simple act of kindness will set in motion a chain of events that will shatter everything they think they know about loss, love, and the impossible possibility that some miracles are worth waiting 7 years to find. The rain begins to fall, and 2 lonely hearts prepare to face another day, unaware that destiny is already putting the pieces in place for the most important encounter of their lives. The summer storm hits Bridgeport with vengeance just after noon, turning the streets into rivers and sending most people running for shelter. But Sophie Miller doesn't have the luxury of waiting for clear skies. Martha's medication costs $247 and she has exactly $31 saved in her piggy bank. Rain or shine, she needs to work. She grabs the squeegee Martha bought her last month and the spray bottle filled with soapy water. "I'll be careful, Grandma," she whispers to the empty apartment as if Martha could hear her from the hospital bed 15 minutes away. Meanwhile, James Reynolds sits in his leather office chair 40 floors above the city, watching the same storm through floor-to-ceiling windows. The meeting with Riverside Development Group had ended an hour ago, and their rejection still stings. Not because of the money, he has plenty of that, but because the Bridgeport Community Housing Project was the first development in years that actually meant something to him. "Affordable housing doesn't generate adequate returns, Mr. Reynolds," their lead investor had said, sliding the proposal back across the polished conference table. "Perhaps you should focus on projects that align with your proven track record." His proven track record: luxury condos and shopping plazas that price Out families like the ones Elizabeth used to volunteer with at the community center. Projects that make money but don't make a difference. Peter knocks gently on the door. Ready to head home, sir? Traffic's going to be murder with this weather. James nods, gathering his things. The red Mustang waits in the private garage, a splash of color in the gray afternoon. As they merge onto 4th Street, the rain pounds the windshield so hard the wipers can barely keep up. Looks like we're stuck, Peter says as brake lights stretch endlessly ahead of them. That's when Sophie appears. Through the downpour, James sees a small figure moving between the stopped cars, her bright yellow raincoat like a beacon of determination. She approaches each vehicle with a smile despite being soaked to the bone. Most drivers wave her away, but a few roll down their windows and let her work. She reaches their car and taps gently on the passenger window. James hesitates. He's never bought anything from street vendors. But something about her persistence in this weather makes him nod. As Sophie begins cleaning the windshield, something extraordinary happens. She starts to sing. The melody drifts through the rain, soft but clear, and James's blood turns to ice. It's impossible. The song she's humming, those exact notes, that haunting progression, is Sweet Little Dreamer, the lullaby Elizabeth, composed for Emily during those precious nights when their daughter couldn't sleep. Elizabeth had written it in secret, never recording it, never sharing it with anyone except James. She would sing it while rocking Emily to sleep, her voice carrying love and promises of sweet dreams. It was their family's private treasure, buried with Elizabeth and Emily 7 years ago. Yet here stands this child, singing their song in the rain, as if Elizabeth herself had sent her from beyond. James's hands grip the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turn white. His heart hammers against his ribs as the impossible melody continues, note for note, exactly as Elizabeth used to sing it. Who is this child? And how does she know the one song that could bring the dead back to life? James's breath catches in his throat as the melody continues. Through the rain-streaked glass, he studies the child's face more carefully, his businessman's mind cataloging details while his father's heart screams impossible possibilities. The song isn't the only thing that stops his world from spinning. Her eyes. Even through the storm and the water droplets on the window, James can see them clearly. A striking blue-green, almost turquoise. But it's not just the color that makes his chest tighten. In her right eye, there's a small patch of brown, like a tiny island in an ocean of blue. Heterochromia iridis, a rare genetic condition that affects less than 1% of the population, the same condition Emily had. James remembered the pediatrician explaining it during Emily's 6-month checkup. It's completely harmless, Dr. Martinez had said. And quite beautiful, actually. She'll probably get a lot of compliments on those unique eyes as she grows up. Emily never got the chance to grow up, or so James had believed for 7 years. The girl finishes cleaning their windshield with practiced efficiency, and James fumbles for his wallet. His hands are shaking so badly he can barely pull out the bills. Peter glances at him in the rearview mirror, concerned. Sir, are you feeling all right? James ignores him, rolling down the window as the girl approaches for payment. Rain immediately soaks his expensive suit, but he doesn't care. What's your name, sweetheart? His voice sounds strangled, desperate. The girl smiles, wiping rain from her face. Sophie, sir. Sophie Ann Miller. Sophie Ann Miller, S.A.M. The same initials Elizabeth had chosen for their daughter, Sarah Amelia Reynolds, a name they'd debated for months before Emily was born, finally settling on Emily Grace instead. But Elizabeth had always said if they had another daughter, she'd be Sarah Amelia. How old are you, Sophie? 8, sir. I'll be 9 in June. 8 years old. Exactly the age Emily would be now. James's mind races, calculating impossible mathematics. Emily was 4 months old when she supposedly died in October 2017. If she had survived, if somehow Elizabeth had faked their deaths, Emily would be 8 years old right now. She would be exactly Sophie's age. The similarities pile up like evidence in a court case his heart is desperate to win, but his mind refuses to believe. The song, the eyes, The age, the initials, each detail alone could be coincidence, but together they form a pattern that defies logic. "Here," James says, his voice hoarse. He hands her a $100 bill instead of the typical 5 or 10 most people give. "Keep the change." Sophie's eyes widen, eyes that look so much like the ones he used to see in Emily's crib every morning. "Are you sure, sir? This is a lot of money." "I'm sure." "Sophie, do you work this corner often?" "Usually after school and on weekends when I need money for." She pauses, perhaps realizing she shouldn't share her family's struggles with strangers. "Could you come back tomorrow, same time?" Sophie nods eagerly, clutching the bill like it's a winning lottery ticket. "Yes, sir. Thank you so much." As she moves to the next car, still humming that impossible song, James rolls up the window and slumps back in his seat. Peter starts driving as soon as traffic moves, but James barely notices they're moving. His entire body is trembling. 7 years of grief. 7 years of believing his family was gone forever. And now this child appears like a ghost made flesh, carrying Elizabeth's secret song and Emily's unique eyes. It's impossible. Children don't just come back from the dead. Families don't get second chances after fatal car crashes. But as they drive through the storm toward his empty mansion, James can't shake the feeling that he's just met his daughter for the second time in his life. James doesn't sleep that night. He paces his mansion like a caged animal, replaying every second of the encounter with Sophie. By dawn, he's made a decision that would have seemed insane 24 hours ago. He calls Rebecca Winters. Rebecca has been finding missing persons for 25 years, with a success rate that borders on miraculous. At 52, she's seen every type of case imaginable: runaway teenagers, abducted children, adults who vanished into thin air. But when James Reynolds calls at 6 a.m. asking her to investigate whether a dead child might actually be alive, even she raises an eyebrow. "Mr. Reynolds, I understand you've suffered a tremendous loss," Rebecca says carefully during their meeting at her downtown office. "Sometimes grief can make us see connections that aren't really there." James slides a folder across her desk. Inside are photos of Emily as a baby, medical records, and a USB drive containing a recording of Elizabeth singing "Sweet Little Dreamer." "I need you to investigate a child named Sophie Ann Miller. 8 years old, lives in Bridgeport with her grandmother Martha Miller. I have reason to believe she might be my daughter." Rebecca studies the photos, her expression shifting from skeptical to intrigued. "These are some very specific genetic markers," she admits, examining close-ups of Emily's heterochromia. "Give me 48 hours." Rebecca starts at St. Luke's Hospital, where Martha Miller has been a patient for 2 weeks. Using her credentials as a private investigator and contacts built over decades in law enforcement, she gains access to administrative records. Martha Miller, 67, retired nurse. No children of her own, but became legal guardian to Sophie Ann Miller in January 2018. The timing makes Rebecca's pulse quicken. That's exactly 3 months after the Reynolds family car crash. But it's Sophie's medical records that make Rebecca reach for her phone to call James immediately. "Mr. Reynolds, you need to sit down," she says when he answers. "Sophie Miller has type AB negative blood. That's less than 1% of the population." James's sharp intake of breath tells her he understands the significance. "Emily had AB negative," he whispers. "There's more." "I managed to photograph Sophie's vaccination records during my visit. The scarring patterns from her infant immunizations match the timing and types that would be consistent with a child born in September 2016. Emily's birth month," Rebecca continues, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she's uncovering. "Martha Miller worked as a pediatric nurse at St. Luke's until her retirement in December 2017. She would have had access to medical equipment, supplies, even records, if someone wanted to create a new identity for a child. She could have done it," James finishes. "The guardianship papers show Sophie was approximately 14 months old when Martha took custody. Mr. Reynolds, if your daughter survived that crash, she would have been 14 months old in January 2018. James grips the phone so tightly it creaks. "What about Martha? Have you been able to speak with her?" "She's been sedated most of the time I've observed her. But I did notice something interesting. On her bedside table, there's a small music box. When I wound it up, it plays a lullaby. I hummed along and recorded it. Rebecca sends the audio file to James's phone. When he plays it, his knees nearly give out. It's Sweet Little Dreamer, note for note exactly as Elizabeth used to sing it. Rebecca, James says, his voice breaking. I think my wife didn't just save our daughter from that car crash. I think she saved her from whoever tried to kill us. The investigation has only just begun, but already the impossible is starting to look like the truth. James trades the distinctive red Mustang for his black sedan, hoping to blend in as he returns to 4th Street the next afternoon. But when Sophie spots him through the light drizzle, her face lights up with recognition that makes his heart skip. "You came back," she calls out, jogging toward his car with her cleaning supplies. "I wasn't sure you would." "I keep my promises," James says, rolling down the window. Up close, in better light, the resemblance to Emily is even more striking. The shape of her nose, the way she tilts her head when she smiles. It's like watching home movies of a daughter he thought he'd buried. Sophie's usual bright energy seems dimmed today. "Is everything okay?" James asks. "Grandma Martha got worse last night. The doctors say she needs a different medicine, but it costs $400 and insurance won't." Sophie's voice trails off, probably remembering she shouldn't share family problems with strangers. James makes a decision that surprises even him. "Sophie, would you like me to help? Maybe we could visit your grandmother together?" The suggestion hangs in the air for a moment. Sophie studies his face with an intensity that reminds him of Elizabeth evaluating people's sincerity. "You'd really do that? You don't even know us." "Sometimes helping someone doesn't require knowing them long," James says gently. "It just requires knowing they need help." An hour later, they're walking through the sterile corridors of St. Luke's Hospital. Sophie leads the way to room 412, where Martha Miller lies connected to oxygen tubes, looking far older than her 67 years. "She's sleeping a lot because of the medication," Sophie whispers, pulling a chair close to the bed. "But I think she can hear us." Nurse Susan, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, enters to check Martha's vitals. "You must be Sophie's friend," she says to James. "Martha talks about you constantly, sweetheart," she tells Sophie. "How she found you like an angel appearing at her apartment door." James's pulse quickens. "Found her? 3 years ago, wasn't it, Sophie?" Martha always said. It was like divine intervention. A toddler just standing in the hallway of her building, alone and scared, speaking only a few words. No one knew where she came from. As Susan leaves, Sophie begins humming softly, the same haunting melody from yesterday. But now James notices something crucial. She only knows fragments. Parts of verses, pieces of the chorus, but not the complete song Elizabeth used to sing. "My mama used to sing that to me," Sophie says quietly. "I don't remember much about her, but I remember that song. Sometimes I dream about it, and when I wake up I try to remember more pieces." James's throat constricts. If Sophie is Emily, these aren't recovered memories. They're the last echoes of a mother's love preserved in a child's subconscious. "Do you remember anything else about your mama?" Sophie closes her eyes, concentrating. "She had pretty hair, and she always smelled like flowers. And she was scared of something. I remember her crying sometimes, but trying to hide it." The pieces of the puzzle are falling into place, but James knows he needs more than fragments and feelings. He needs proof. Martha's eyes flutter open just as Sophie steps out to buy sodas from the vending machine. For a moment, she seems disoriented, but when her gaze settles on James, her expression sharpens with startling clarity. "James Reynolds," she whispers, her voice hoarse but certain. "I wondered if you'd find us eventually." James's blood turns to ice. "You know who I am?" Martha struggles to sit up, her weathered hands trembling. "Elizabeth showed me your picture 100 times. She loved you so much, James. Even when she was terrified. Even when she thought you might be dead too. She never stopped loving you." "What are you talking about? Elizabeth died 7 years ago." "No." Martha's voice grows stronger. Elizabeth died 4 years ago, February 15th, 2022. Brain aneurysm, completely sudden. Tears stream down her cheeks. But she lived long enough to see Sophie safe, to know her daughter would survive. James grabs the bedside rail to steady himself. That's impossible. I identified their bodies. I buried them. Martha reaches under her pillow with shaking hands and pulls out a small key. Behind my dresser at home, there's a fireproof box. Elizabeth made me promise that if anything happened to her, if you ever found Sophie, I'd give this to you. Martha, what are you saying? The car crash wasn't an accident, James. Someone tried to kill your family. Elizabeth figured it out just in time. Martha's voice drops to an urgent whisper. She had minutes to decide. Trust the police who might be compromised or disappear with Emily until she could find out who wanted you dead. James's mind reels. The bodies in the morgue. Elizabeth was a nurse. She knew people, had connections. I don't know all the details, but she managed it somehow. Created death certificates, dental records. She was hiding at my apartment, recovering from injuries from the crash. Real injuries, James. She barely survived. And Emily, Sophie. Emily became Sophie. New birth certificate, new medical records. Elizabeth was my second cousin. Distant enough that no one would make the connection, close enough that I'd help her without question. Martha grips his hand with surprising strength. She spent 4 years investigating, trying to find proof of who tried to kill you. She was getting close when the aneurysm took her. Sophie's laughter echoes from the hallway as she chats with another patient. Martha's eyes fill with fresh tears. That child doesn't know any of this. Elizabeth wanted to tell her when she was older, wanted to reunite your family properly. But then, Martha's voice breaks. I've been Sophie's grandmother for 4 years. I love her like she's my own blood. But James, she's your daughter. She has your stubbornness, Elizabeth's heart, and a strength that comes from surviving the impossible. James stares at Martha, processing revelations that rewrite everything he thought he knew about the last 7 years. The box, Martha. What's in Elizabeth's box? Everything. Letters to you, to Sophie. Evidence about who tried to kill you. The truth about why she couldn't come home. Sophie appears in the doorway with 3 sodas, smiling at them both, unaware that her world is about to change forever. 3 days later, Rebecca Winters sits across from James in his study, a manila folder thick with evidence spread between them. Martha's fireproof box had yielded treasures and terrors in equal measure. Elizabeth's detailed investigation notes, bank records, and a USB drive containing security footage that should have been destroyed years ago. Victor Harrington, Rebecca says, sliding a photograph across the table. Your former business partner and the man who tried to murder your family. James stares at the familiar face. Someone he'd trusted, someone he'd considered a friend. Victor, that's impossible. He helped me through the funeral arrangements. He kept the business running when I couldn't function, which gave him perfect access to everything. Look at these bank transfers. Rebecca points to highlighted transactions. 3 weeks before your family's accident, Victor moved $24 million from your joint Riverside development account to an offshore shell company, money that was supposed to fund the Bridgeport housing project. The room spins as James processes the betrayal. He stole from the project Elizabeth cared about most. There's more. Victor purchased a $10 million life insurance policy on you just 3 months before the crash. He's listed as the beneficiary in case of your death during a business-related incident. Rebecca hands him a small device that looks like an expensive watch. This records everything within 20 feet. We need Victor to confess, James. Elizabeth's notes show she was close to exposing him when she died. We can finish what she started. 2 hours later, James walks into the gleaming Harrington Tower, his heart pounding but his resolve steel strong. Victor's corner office on the 45th floor overlooks the city like a king surveying his conquered territory. James? Victor stands with practiced warmth, the same smile that had fooled James for years. What brings you here? Still thinking about that Bridgeport project? Actually, I wanted to thank you, Victor, for everything you did after Elizabeth. And Emily died. Victor's smile falters slightly. Of course, we were partners, friends. Were we? James activates the recording device. Because I've been wondering about something. The brake failure that killed my family. Pretty convenient timing, wasn't it? The mask slips completely from Victor's face. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm asking directly. Did you sabotage my car? For a moment, silence fills the office. Then Victor laughs, a cold sound devoid of humor. After 7 years, you're still chasing ghosts? James, you need to move on. Like you moved on? Into my projects, my clients, my company? Victor's eyes narrow. I saved this company while you were drowning in grief. I turned your sentimental housing project into profitable ventures. I made us both rich by stealing $24 million and murdering my family. Murder? Victor walks to his window, hands clasped behind his back. That's a strong word for a tragic accident. Except it wasn't an accident, was it, Victor? The silence stretches until Victor turns, his expression now completely cold. You want the truth, James? Fine. The brakes should have failed on the highway, not on that residential street. You were supposed to die with them. Clean, simple, profitable. James's hands clench into fists, but he forces himself to remain calm. Why? Because you were going to waste millions on housing for people who couldn't afford market rates. Because your bleeding heart was going to bankrupt us both. Because weak men like you don't deserve empires. So you tried to kill us. Victor shrugs with chilling indifference. I solved a business problem. Unfortunately, your wife was smarter than I gave her credit for. Took me years to realize she'd faked their deaths. The confession hangs in the air like poison. James has what he came for, but the cost of hearing it nearly breaks him. 7 years, Victor. 7 years I mourned my family while you counted stolen money. And now? What are you going to do about it? James heads toward the elevator, his steps steady despite the storm raging inside him. I'm going to finish what Elizabeth started. 30 minutes later, he places the recording device on District Attorney Mark Sinclair's desk. Mark, I need you to listen to this, and then I need you to arrest the man who murdered my family. The arrest of Victor Harrington makes headlines across the city, but James barely notices the media frenzy. His focus is entirely on room 412 at St. Luke's Hospital, where Martha is finally strong enough to sit up, and Sophie is helping her with physical therapy exercises. 3 weeks have passed since Victor's confession, and the specialist treatments James quietly funded are working. Martha's pneumonia is clearing, her strength returning, but James can see the worry lines etched deeper around her eyes. At 67, the scare has forced her to confront a harsh reality. She won't be able to care for Sophie forever. I have something to show you both, James says, settling into the familiar chair beside Martha's bed. He pulls out a small photo album, hands trembling slightly as he opens to the first page. Sophie leans in curiously while Martha's breath catches in recognition. This is Elizabeth, James says softly, pointing to a photo of his wife laughing in their kitchen, flour on her apron, joy radiating from her face. She was one of my dearest friends. Sophie studies the photo intently. She's beautiful. She looks kind. She was the kindest person I ever knew. James turns the page to show Elizabeth at a community center, serving meals to families. She volunteered in Bridgeport, helping families just like yours. She believed everyone deserved a safe home and good opportunities. Martha squeezes Sophie's hand gently. She sounds like someone special. She was. And before she died, she asked me to look out for people she cared about, especially children who needed help. James closes the album and looks directly at both of them. I know this might sound sudden, but I'd like to help you both. Sophie tilts her head with that familiar gesture that breaks James's heart. Help us how? I've been thinking about your situation, Martha's health, your need for a stable home, your education. I'd like to offer you an apartment in a building I own called Cedar Gardens. It's in a safe neighborhood with good schools, and there's an on-site medical clinic for Martha. Martha's eyes widen. Mr. Reynolds, we couldn't possibly afford. There wouldn't be any rent, James says quickly. Elizabeth left me with substantial resources, and I've been looking for the right way to honor her memory. This feels right. Sophie looks between James and Martha, processing the magnitude of the offer. You'd really do that? Just because you were friends with my mama? The word mama hits James like a physical blow, but he manages to keep his voice steady. Your mother made an impression on Elizabeth. She talked about her often. How brave she was, how much she loved you. Martha studies James carefully, and he can see her weighing their options. The hospital scare has shown her the fragility of their situation. If something happens to her, Sophie would have nowhere to go. The apartment, Martha says slowly, it would be ours, not charity, but a real home. Completely yours. And Sophie, there's an excellent elementary school nearby, Oak Ridge Elementary. They have a wonderful music program. Sophie's eyes light up. Music program? Piano, violin, choir. Elizabeth always said music was food for the soul. Martha makes the decision. That will change everything. Sophie, what do you think? Sophie considers seriously, like the small adult she's had to become. If it means you can get better and we can stay together, then yes. But, she looks at James with Elizabeth's directness. I want to keep helping other people too. Even if we live somewhere nice. James smiles, seeing his wife's generous heart living on in their daughter. I wouldn't expect anything less. As they discuss practical details, the move, school enrollment, Martha's continued treatment, James feels Elizabeth's presence in the room. This isn't the reunion he'd dreamed of, but it's a beginning. A chance to be part of Sophie's life, while she slowly learns to trust him. One more thing, Sophie says as they prepare to leave. Could we visit Elizabeth's grave sometime? I'd like to thank her for having such a good friend. James's throat tightens. I'd like that very much, Sophie. August sunlight streams through the windows of apartment 3B at Cedar Gardens as Sophie unpacks her few belongings in what feels like a palace compared to their old place. The two-bedroom unit has a real kitchen with a dishwasher, a living room, large enough for furniture, and best of all, a small balcony where Martha can tend to the herb garden she's always wanted. Look, Grandma, Sophie calls from her new bedroom. I can see the playground from my window. Martha, moving slowly but steadily after her recovery, joins Sophie at the window. The view shows children playing, families walking dogs, normal life, in a safe neighborhood. It's like a dream, sweetheart. A knock at the door interrupts their unpacking. James stands in the hallway with grocery bags and a warm smile. Welcome home, he says simply. Over the next 2 weeks, as Sophie prepares to start 3rd grade at Oak Ridge Elementary, a comfortable routine develops. James visits Tuesday and Thursday evenings for dinner, always bringing groceries and often staying to help Sophie with homework. Saturdays become adventure days, the science museum, the botanical gardens, the children's theater downtown. During these outings, James discovers remarkable details that strengthen his certainty about Sophie's identity. At an ice cream shop, Sophie automatically avoids strawberry flavors. I'm allergic, she explains matter-of-factly. Grandma says I always have been. Elizabeth had the same allergy. At the museum, Sophie gravitates toward the mathematics exhibit, solving puzzles designed for children much older. Numbers just make sense to me, she says, echoing words Elizabeth used to say during her accounting classes. But it's at Oak Ridge Elementary that Sophie's most extraordinary gift emerges. Ms. Thompson, the music teacher, discovers Sophie's talent during the first week of school. Martha, she says during a parent conference, Sophie has perfect pitch. It's incredibly rare. Has she had formal training? Just singing to herself, Martha replies. She's always been musical. Ms. Thompson's eyes light up. Would she be interested in joining our advanced choir? We're preparing for the winter concert. That evening, Sophie practically bounces with excitement as she tells James about music class. Ms. Thompson says I have a gift. She wants to teach me piano and maybe I could perform in the concert. That sounds wonderful, James says, his throat tight with emotion. Elizabeth had perfect pitch too. had dreamed of Sophie inheriting her musical abilities. Uncle James, Sophie says suddenly, the title slipping out naturally for the first time. She doesn't seem to notice the significance, but James feels his heart skip. Would you come to my concert when it happens? I wouldn't miss it for the world. As September settles into routine, James marvels at how seamlessly Sophie has adapted to her new life while maintaining her generous spirit. She organizes a clothing drive at school for families in her old neighborhood. She insists on visiting elderly residents at Cedar Gardens, singing for them during their afternoon social hour. She's remarkable, Martha tells James one Thursday evening as they watch Sophie practice piano on the small keyboard he bought for her. Elizabeth would be so proud. James nods, unable to speak past the emotion choking him. Every day brings new proof that this bright, compassionate, musically gifted child is his daughter. But more than that, he's falling in love with who Sophie has become, shaped by Martha's nurturing and Elizabeth's sacrifice into someone extraordinary. Uncle James, Sophie says, looking up from her keyboard, do you think people who die can still hear music? I think they can hear everything that matters, he replies truthfully. Sophie nods solemnly, then returns to playing a simple melody that sounds hauntingly familiar, fragments of Sweet Little Dreamer woven into her own creation. September brings cooler evenings and a comfortable rhythm to their unlikely family. Sophie spends Saturday afternoons at James's mansion, initially awed by its size but quickly making herself at home. She's claimed the library as her favorite room, curling up in the oversized leather chair with books while James works nearby. This particular Saturday, they're working on a 1,000-piece puzzle depicting Monet's water lilies. Sophie has an uncanny ability to see patterns, finding pieces that James would have struggled with for hours. Uncle James, she says, fitting together a section of purple flowers. Why don't you have pictures of your family around the house? The question catches him off guard. He'd carefully removed most photos of Elizabeth and Emily years ago, unable to bear the constant reminders. Sometimes memories are too precious to put on display. But don't you want to remember them? James studies her earnest face, wondering how to explain grief to an 8-year-old. I remember them every day. Pictures aren't the only way to keep people close to your heart. Sophie nods thoughtfully, then wanders toward his office. Can I get a drink from your kitchen? Of course. But instead of heading to the kitchen, curiosity draws her to the mahogany desk where James keeps his most private possessions. In the bottom drawer, partially hidden beneath business documents, she finds a small wooden box with an intricate carved lid. Uncle James? She calls. What's in this pretty box? James freezes, recognizing the memory box Elizabeth gave him on their first anniversary. Sophie, that's... But she's already lifting the lid, revealing carefully preserved photographs. The top photo stops her cold. A baby with distinctive heterochromia, wearing a delicate gold bracelet with a star-shaped pendant. Sophie's hand instinctively moves to her own wrist, where an identical bracelet catches the afternoon light. The only thing she has from her mother, the one treasure Martha could never explain. Uncle James. Her voice is barely a whisper. Who is this baby? James appears in the doorway, his face pale. There's no more hiding, no more careful dancing around the truth. The moment he's been both dreading and hoping for has arrived. Her name was Emily, he says softly. She was my daughter. Sophie stares at the photo, then at her bracelet, then back at the photo. The resemblance is unmistakable. The same eyes, the same delicate features, even the same wispy hair. Emily, she repeats slowly. And she died? I thought she did. For 7 years, I believed my daughter died in a car accident with her mother. James takes a careful step into the room. But Sophie, I believe you might be Emily. The words hang in the air like a thunderclap. Sophie drops the photo, backing away from the desk. That's impossible. I'm Sophie Miller. Martha is my grandma. My mama died when I was little, but she wasn't. Sophie's breathing becomes rapid, panicky. Sophie, please listen. No, She runs past him, grabbing the phone from the kitchen counter. Her small fingers dial Martha's number with practiced speed. "Grandma, you need to come right now. Uncle James is saying crazy things about me being someone else. Please come." Martha arrives within 20 minutes, finding Sophie curled up on the living room couch, tears streaming down her face. James sits across the room looking devastated. "Sophie, sweetheart," Martha says gently, pulling the child into her arms. "What's happened?" "He thinks I'm his daughter who died. But I'm not dead. I'm Sophie, and you're my grandma, and my mama loved me even though she had to go away." Martha looks at James over Sophie's head, and something passes between them. A recognition of truth that can no longer be avoided. "Sophie," Martha says carefully, "what if I told you that sometimes people have to pretend to be someone else to stay safe? What if your mama had to give you a new name to protect you?" Sophie pulls back, searching Martha's face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you're still the same precious girl you've always been. But your story might be bigger than we thought." For 3 days, Sophie refuses to speak to James. She stays in her room, coming out only for meals, processing information that challenges everything she thought she knew about herself. On the 4th day, she finally calls him. "Uncle James? If I really am Emily, if I really am your daughter." Her voice is small but determined. "Why did my mama run away? Why was she so scared of you?" The question cuts through James like a blade. Why was Elizabeth so scared? Because she thought he might be the one trying to kill their family. Because in those terrifying moments after the crash, with Emily crying and strangers approaching, she had to make an impossible choice with no time to verify who could be trusted. But explaining that to an 8-year-old requires more than words. It requires proof that he's worthy of trust. "Sophie," James says carefully during their phone conversation, "your mama wasn't scared of me. She was scared for you. Sometimes when people we love are in danger, we make choices that seem wrong but are actually acts of love." "I don't understand." "Maybe I could show you instead of trying to explain. Would you let me visit the places you love? I'd like to understand the world you've been living in." Over the next 2 weeks, James does something he's never done before. He explores Bridgeport not as a developer evaluating property values, but as someone trying to understand a community. He starts at the Bridgeport Public Library where Mrs. Chen, the elderly librarian, tells him Sophie comes every Tuesday after school. "That child reads everything," she says proudly. "Advanced chapter books, science encyclopedias, poetry. Last week she helped me organize the children's section because she knows where everything belongs." James sits in Sophie's favorite corner, surrounded by the books she loves, trying to see the world through her eyes. The library is worn but welcoming, filled with families who treat it like a second home. Next, he visits Rosa's cafe, where Sophie apparently stops for hot chocolate on rainy days. Rosa, a robust woman, in her 50s, recognizes James from news coverage of Victor's arrest. "You're that rich developer," she says, not unkindly, but with wariness. Sophie talks about her Uncle James all the time. Says you're teaching her about Elizabeth. "Elizabeth was my wife," James admits. "Sophie is very special to me." Rosa studies him carefully. That little girl has more heart in her pinky finger than most adults have in their whole body. She organizes birthday parties for kids whose families can't afford them. She reads to Mr. Martinez when his eyes give him trouble. "You better be worthy of her." The warning is clear, and James respects Rosa for protecting Sophie. His most revealing stop is Riverside Park, where Sophie plays every Sunday afternoon. James watches from a bench as neighborhood children gather around her, drawn by her natural leadership and kindness. She mediates playground disputes, includes lonely kids in games, and shares her snacks with anyone who looks hungry. This is who his daughter has become, not despite growing up in a struggling community, but because of it. Martha and this neighborhood have raised Emily to be exactly the person Elizabeth dreamed she would become. When Sophie finally agrees to see him again, it's to invite him to the annual Bridgeport Community Festival. "It's this Saturday," she says during a carefully supervised visit with Martha present. "We raise money for families who need help with groceries and rent." I thought, maybe you'd like to see how we take care of each other here. James arrives at the festival to find the community center's sound system completely dead. Without being asked, he calls his audio technician and has professional equipment delivered within 2 hours. When the organizers try to thank him, he waves them off. Sophie invited me. This is her community. As the day progresses, James finds himself genuinely engaged, not as a wealthy benefactor condescending to help the poor, but as someone learning from a community that prioritizes connection over competition. He helps elderly residents set up their craft booths, listens to teenagers talk about their college dreams, and quietly arranges for anonymous funding to repair the community center's leaking roof. But the moment that changes everything comes when Mr. Martinez, the elderly man Sophie reads to, approaches James during the evening dance. She talks about you, you know, he says in accented English. Says you knew her mama, that you're teaching her about music and books. But mostly, she says you listen to her like she matters. James watches Sophie dancing with other children, her laughter carrying across the courtyard. That little girl has been through more than any child should, Mr. Martinez continues. But she still believes in goodness, still trusts people to be better than they are. Don't prove her wrong. As the festival winds down, Sophie approaches James with dirt on her dress and joy in her eyes. Thank you for coming, Uncle James. And for fixing the speakers and for... She gestures vaguely at the successful event. Thank you for inviting me. I learned something important today. What? That your mama was right about what matters most. It's not how much money you have or how big your house is. It's how you treat people and whether you make the world a little better. Sophie smiles. The first real smile she's given him since learning the truth. That sounds like something Elizabeth would say, she admits. Maybe. Maybe you really did know my mama after all. October brings both closure and new beginnings as Victor Harrington's trial dominates local headlines. The story of the separated family captures public attention. A wealthy businessman who never stopped searching, a brave mother who faked her death to protect her child, and an 8-year-old girl caught between two worlds. James sits in the courthouse hallway with Sophie and Martha, waiting to testify. The DNA results arrived 3 days ago, printed in clinical black and white. 99.97% probability that Sophie Ann Miller is the biological daughter of James Reynolds. The science confirms what his heart already knew, but seeing it officially documented still takes his breath away. Uncle James, Sophie says quietly, are you nervous about talking to the judge? A little, he admits, but I'm more excited about what comes after. After weeks of discussion with family court mediators, they've reached an unprecedented arrangement. James will regain legal custody of his daughter, but Martha will remain as joint guardian. Sophie will live primarily at Cedar Gardens but spend weekends at James's mansion. Most importantly, the decision will be Sophie's as she grows older. Judge Rebecca Henderson, a woman known for prioritizing children's welfare over legal convenience, calls them into her chambers for a private meeting. Sophie, Judge Henderson, says kindly, this is a very unusual situation. I need to understand what you want, not what the adults think is best for you. Sophie sits straighter in her chair, every inch the mature child she's had to become. I want to stay with Grandma Martha because she saved me and loved me when I was scared. But I also want to know my daddy and learn about my Mama Elizabeth. And if your father wants to be called Daddy instead of Uncle James. Sophie considers this carefully. I think I'd like that. But could I still be Sophie? I know I used to be Emily, but Sophie is who I am now. Judge Henderson nods approvingly. Sophie, you can be whoever you choose to be. Names don't change the love in your heart. James's attorneys have prepared comprehensive documents ensuring Martha's financial security for life. A trust fund for Sophie will cover college, health care, and any future needs. Most importantly, legal protections ensure that Sophie can never be separated from Martha against her will. There's one more thing, Sophie says as they prepare to sign the official papers. Could my new name be Sophie Emily Miller Reynolds? I want to keep all the parts of my story. James's eyes fill with tears. That's perfect, sweetheart. Absolutely perfect. The signing ceremony takes place in Judge Henderson's office, with Martha holding Sophie's hand and James standing beside them. For the first time in 7 years, James signs his name as someone's father. As they leave the courthouse, reporters crowd around them, but James shields Sophie from the cameras. The little girl who once cleaned windshields in the rain is now the center of a media sensation, but her safety and privacy matter more than any story. "Daddy James," Sophie says as they walk to the car, testing out the new title. "When we go home, could we put up some pictures of Mama Elizabeth? I think I'm ready to see them now." "We'll put up pictures in both homes," James promises. "And Martha, I want you to help choose them. You knew Elizabeth during those last years better than anyone." That evening, in the quiet of Cedar Gardens, apartment 3B, they look through photo albums together. Sophie studies each image of Elizabeth with intense curiosity, finally seeing the mother she barely remembers. "She looks like she was happy," Sophie observes. "She was," Martha says softly. "Even when she was scared, even when everything was uncertain, she was happy because she had you." "And now," Sophie says, reaching for both James and Martha's hands, "I have both of you. Mama Elizabeth would like that, wouldn't she?" James squeezes her small hand gently. "I think she'd be proud of all of us." December snowflakes dust the windows of Oak Ridge Elementary as families gather in the school auditorium for the winter music concert. 6 months have passed since that rain-soaked afternoon when James first heard Sophie singing at the traffic light, and tonight marks a milestone none of them could have imagined. The program lists 23 young performers, but James's eyes focus on only one name: Sophie Emily Miller Reynolds, piano solo, Sweet Little Dreamer, Variations. The auditorium buzzes with an unusual energy. Word has spread throughout both Bridgeport and Westlake Hills about the extraordinary reunion, and tonight's audience reflects both communities. Rosa from the cafe sits beside James's business associate Patricia. Mr. Martinez occupies a front row seat next to Rebecca Winters, the investigator who helped piece their family back together. Martha, radiant in a navy dress James bought for the occasion, squeezes his hand as they wait. "She's been practicing for weeks," she whispers. Ms. Thompson says she's never seen a child with such natural understanding of musical emotion. Backstage, Sophie adjusts the emerald green dress that was Elizabeth's favorite color, a conscious choice James suggested and she eagerly embraced. Around her neck hangs the small silver locket he gave her last week. Inside, tiny photos of Elizabeth and Martha, the two mothers who shaped her life. Ms. Thompson finds Sophie in the wings, smoothing her hair nervously. "Remember, sweetheart, this isn't about perfection. It's about sharing your heart through music." "I know," Sophie says, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I'm playing this for them. For all of them." When her name is announced, Sophie walks to the piano with the quiet confidence of a child who has learned to be brave. The audience falls silent as she adjusts the bench and places her hands on the keys. The opening notes of Sweet Little Dreamer fill the auditorium, but this isn't the simple lullaby Elizabeth once hummed. Sophie has transformed it into something entirely new, a musical journey that begins with the haunting original melody, then evolves through variations that tell a story. The first variation is gentle and searching, like a child trying to remember something precious. The second builds with longing and loss, minor keys that speak of separation and fear. But the third variation blooms with hope, major chords that climb toward resolution and reunion. In the audience, James grips Martha's hand as tears stream down his face. Every note carries the weight of their journey: Elizabeth's sacrifice, Sophie's resilience, his own long search for meaning after loss. The final variation weaves all the themes together, ending not with the original lullaby, but with something entirely new. A melody that belongs to Sophie Emily Miller Reynolds, a song born from her unique experience of being loved by 3 parents across 2 lifetimes. As the last note fades, silence holds the auditorium for a heartbeat before erupting into thunderous applause. Sophie stands and curtsies, then walks to the microphone Ms. Thompson has placed beside the piano. "I want to dedicate this performance to 3 people," she says, her clear voice carrying to every corner of the room. To my mama, Elizabeth, who kept me safe even when I couldn't understand why. To my grandma, Martha, who gave me a home and taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice and love and never giving up on each other. She pauses, finding James in the audience, and her next words break his heart open in the most beautiful way. And to my daddy, James, who never stopped looking for me, even when everyone told him I was gone forever. The applause is deafening, but James barely hears it. He sees only his daughter, not the baby he lost 7 years ago, but the remarkable young woman she's becoming. Beside him, Martha wipes her eyes and laughs through her tears. Look at her, Martha whispers. She's not just Emily anymore, and she's not just Sophie. She's exactly who she's supposed to be. After the concert, they're surrounded by well-wishers from both communities. Sophie moves between the groups with easy grace, introducing her Bridgeport neighbors to her father's colleagues, building bridges James never imagined possible. Rosa approaches James with tears in her eyes. You did good, mijo. You let her stay herself while helping her grow. As they drive home through the snowy evening, Sophie chatters excitedly about the performance. But James finds himself thinking about Elizabeth. Somehow their broken family has reassembled into something different but equally beautiful. Not the nuclear family he'd originally dreamed of, but a chosen family bound by love, loss, and the courage to hope again. Daddy James, Sophie says as they pull into Cedar Gardens, do you think Mama Elizabeth heard my concert tonight? James looks at this extraordinary child who carries his genes, Elizabeth's heart and Martha's strength, who has taught him that love multiplies rather than divides. I think she heard every note, sweetheart, and I think she's proud of all of February 15th, 2026, dawns cold and gray, marking 4 years since Elizabeth's death and 8 months since Sophie learned the truth about her identity. The significance of the date weighs heavily on all three of them as they prepare for their first visit together to Elizabeth's memorial. James had commissioned a small granite bench in Riverside Memorial Gardens, positioned under an oak tree with a brass plaque reading, Elizabeth Ann Reynolds, beloved wife and mother, her love lives on. He'd visited alone for years, but today, Sophie insisted they go as a family. Martha bundles Sophie into her warmest coat while James loads the car with white daisies, Elizabeth's favorite flowers. The drive is quiet, each lost in their own thoughts about the woman who brought them together through her sacrifice. At the memorial site, Sophie carries a small notebook she's been writing in for weeks. I wrote letters to Mama Elizabeth, she explains softly. Ms. Thompson said sometimes it helps to talk to people we miss, even if they can't answer back. They arrange the flowers around the bench, and Sophie kneels to place her letters beside the plaque. James catches glimpses of her careful cursive. Dear Mama, I learned to play piano. And I have a daddy now, but I still miss you. She saved us all, you know. Martha says quietly, settling onto the bench. Not just you and Sophie from that car crash, but me too. Before Sophie came into my life, I was just a lonely old nurse counting down my days. She gave me purpose. James sits beside Martha, watching Sophie trace Elizabeth's name with her finger. I spent so many years angry at her for leaving, even though I knew it wasn't her choice. I understand now. She didn't leave us. She just went ahead to make sure we'd find each other when we were ready. Sophie looks up from her letters. Daddy James, do you think she knew we'd be a family like this? With Grandma Martha in your big house and my school friends all mixed together? I think your mama was smart enough to know that love doesn't follow rules, James replies. She knew that if we found each other, we'd figure out how to make it work. Their peaceful moment is interrupted by James's phone buzzing. District Attorney Mark Sinclair's name appears on the screen. James, I wanted you to hear this directly. The jury just came back. Victor Harrington, guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, embezzlement, fraud. Judge Morrison sentenced him to 25 years without the possibility of parole. The words wash over James, without the satisfaction he expected. Thank you, Mark. Justice for Elizabeth and Emily. For Sophie. After he hangs up, Martha studies his face. You don't look happy about it. I thought I'd feel more resolved. but nothing can bring back the 7 years we lost. Nothing can undo the fear Elizabeth lived with those last 4 years. Sophie abandons her letters and climbs onto the bench between them. "Daddy James, are you sad about the bad man going to jail?" "Not sad. Exactly. I'm glad he can't hurt anyone else. But I realized something today. Being angry at Victor won't bring Mama Elizabeth back or give us more time with her. All it does is make my heart smaller." Sophie considers this with the wisdom of a child who's learned too much about loss. Grandma Martha says forgiveness isn't about making bad people feel better. It's about making room in your heart for good things. Martha nods approvingly. Sometimes the smartest thing I ever said gets repeated by an 8-year-old. They sit in comfortable silence as afternoon shadows lengthen across the memorial garden. Other visitors come and go. Elderly couples, young families, solitary mourners carrying their own burdens of grief and love. "I have an idea," Sophie says suddenly. "What if we come here every year on this day, but instead of being sad, we tell stories about all the good things that happened because of Mama Elizabeth's love?" James feels something shift inside his chest. Not the absence of grief, but grief transformed into gratitude. "I'd like that very much." As they prepare to leave, Sophie gathers her letters and tucks them into her coat pocket. "I changed my mind about leaving these here. I think I want to keep them, to remember what I wanted to tell her. But maybe next year I'll write new ones about all the good things that happened." Walking back to the car, Martha links arms with both James and Sophie. "You know what Elizabeth would say if she could see us now?" "What?" Sophie asks. "She'd say we're exactly the family she prayed we'd become. Not perfect, but perfect for each other." As they drive away from the memorial, James catches Sophie's eye in the rearview mirror. She's looking back at the oak tree, not with sadness, but with the expression of someone who's made peace with the past and is ready to embrace the future. The legal chapter of their story has closed with Victor's sentencing, but the real story, the one about love conquering loss, is just beginning. June 1st, 2026. Exactly 1 year since that rainy afternoon when destiny brought James and Sophie together at a red light on 4th Street. The date isn't lost on any of them as they prepare for Sophie's 9th birthday celebration. But today there's no sadness in the remembering, only wonder at how far they've traveled together. The Reynolds mansion has been transformed beyond recognition. Gone are the sterile white walls and formal furniture that spoke of wealth without warmth. In their place, vibrant colors chosen by Sophie brighten every room. The East Wing now houses a proper music studio where Sophie composes daily, and the garden blooms with Martha's medicinal herbs and vegetables that she shares with the entire neighborhood. James watches from the kitchen window as Sophie and Martha hang streamers in the backyard, preparing for a party that will host an unprecedented guest list. Children from Oak Ridge Elementary will play alongside the sons and daughters of James's business associates. Rosa is bringing homemade tamales to complement the catered barbecue. Mr. Martinez sits in the shade tuning his guitar for the evening's entertainment. "Nervous about tonight?" Rebecca Winters asks, joining James at the window. The investigator has become an unexpected family friend, often joining them for Sunday dinners. "Excited," James corrects. "A year ago, I thought my life was about building buildings and making money. Now I'm hosting a birthday party for my daughter who's teaching me that home isn't a place. It's the people who choose to love you." The afternoon unfolds with the chaotic joy that only children's parties can provide. Sophie moves effortlessly between her school friends from Bridgeport and the more privileged children from Westlake Hills, her natural leadership helping everyone feel included. James finds himself in deep conversation with parents from both communities, discovering common ground he never knew existed. But the evening's centerpiece comes when Sophie takes her place at the piano that now sits on the mansion's back terrace. The conversations gradually quiet as she adjusts the bench, her fingers finding the keys with practiced confidence. "Before I play my birthday song," she announces to the gathered crowd, "I want to tell you a story. A year ago I was cleaning car windows to help pay for my grandma's medicine. I was scared and lonely and angry that life was so hard. But then I met my daddy James, and everything changed. Not because he had money to fix our problems, but because he had room in his heart to love us." She glances at Martha, radiant in the front row. then at James, who stands beside the piano, with tears already threatening. This song is called Finding Home, and it's about learning that family isn't just the people you're born to. It's the people who choose to stay when things get difficult, who help you become the best version of yourself, and who love you enough to let you keep growing. The opening notes are unlike anything Sophie has played before. Not a variation on Elizabeth's lullaby, but an entirely original composition that weaves together themes from her journey. The melody begins tentatively, like a child alone in the rain, then grows stronger as new voices join in harmony. There are echoes of Sweet Little Dreamer woven throughout, but they're transformed into something that belongs entirely to Sophie. Emily Miller Reynolds. The music tells the story of loss and fear giving way to hope and healing, of three lonely people discovering they could become a family stronger than any traditional structure. As the final notes fade into the summer evening, Sophie stands and addresses her audience with the poise of someone far older than 9. Some people think I lost my family twice, once when my mama Elizabeth died in that car crash, and again when I learned my whole life was different than I thought. But the truth is, I didn't lose anything. I gained a family bigger than I ever imagined possible. She gestures to encompass not just James and Martha, but the entire gathering of friends from both sides of her life. My mama Elizabeth sacrificed everything to keep me safe until my daddy could find me. Grandma Martha gave me a home when I had nowhere else to go. Daddy James never stopped believing I was out there somewhere. And all of you, my teachers, my friends, my neighbors from both communities, you've shown me that love doesn't divide, it multiplies. The applause is thunderous, but James barely hears it. He's looking at the portrait of Elizabeth that now hangs prominently in the living room, visible through the terrace doors. In the fading light, he could swear he sees her smiling. Later, after the guests have gone home and Sophie is asleep in her room surrounded by birthday presents from two communities that have learned to blend, James and Martha sit on the terrace, sharing a quiet glass of wine. "You know what the most amazing part is?" Martha says, watching the lights of the city twinkle below them. "What's that?" Elizabeth's plan worked perfectly. She wanted Sophie to grow up knowing she was loved, to have opportunities to develop her gifts and to learn that family comes in all different shapes. Mission accomplished. James raises his glass in a toast to the woman whose sacrifice made this moment possible. To Elizabeth, who knew that sometimes the longest way home is the only way that matters. In her bedroom, Sophie Emily Miller Reynolds sleeps peacefully, her composition notebook open beside her to a page that reads, "Dear Mama Elizabeth, I finally understand what you meant when you used to say that love is the only thing that grows when you share it. Thank you for sharing yours with all of us." Outside, the stars shine down on a family that defied every conventional definition, but discovered something far more precious than perfection. They found their way home to each other, exactly as Elizabeth always knew they would.